What would you do if you came home early and found your wife in bed with her boss? This is the true story of betrayal, revenge, and a shocking twist that no one saw coming. It wasn't exactly fair on my part to take them down from cover while they were unaware of my presence, but the situation left me no choice. There were 6 people in the clearing. One man had a knife to another man's throat, another was pointing a pistol at a woman, and a third was ripping the clothes off a young girl. My first shot hit the man with the knife square in the forehead, and he crumpled like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The man with the gun spun at the sound of the shot, but my next bullet found its mark, tearing through his throat. The man trying to strip the girl stepped back and raised his hands in a universal gesture of surrender, but unfortunately for him, I wasn't accepting prisoners that night. My third shot hit him clean in the forehead. Killing them didn't bother me. These weren't the first men I'd taken down. Uncle Sam had taught me well, and I'd had plenty of practice during my tours overseas. I had no qualms about handling bad guys. With 3 of them down, I stayed hidden, making sure no one else was around who could pose a threat. The man and woman rushed over to help the young girl as I watched from the edge of the trees. My mind wandered, thinking back to what had brought me to this moment. I was in El Paso, Texas, not far from the Mexican border. I had been hunting wild boar and had just laid down in my tent when I heard the woman scream. Instinct kicked in, and I grabbed my rifle, a custom AR-15 I built myself, and set off to investigate. When I reached the clearing, it didn't take long to figure out who the villains were, and I dealt with them quickly. Even the one who tried to surrender had to go. I wasn't about to involve the local authorities in this mess. My hunt for boar was over, and by dawn, I planned to be halfway back home to Phoenix, Arizona. Curiosity got the better of me, so after ensuring there were no additional threats, I stepped into the clearing, rifle slung over my shoulder. The 3 survivors, 2 adults and a teenage girl, looked up as I approached. The woman's clothes were torn, and she was trembling. The man, clearly Latino, looked to be in his early 40s. I gestured toward the girl and asked, "Is she okay?" The man, whose accent suggested he was from southern Mexico, spoke up, his voice thick with gratitude. "Thanks to you, Señor, she is fine." He went on to explain that his name was Miguel. He and his family had paid the men I had just killed to smuggle them into the U.S. and take them to a cousin in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Everything had gone fine until they crossed the border, where they met the 3rd man, who was supposed to drive them the rest of the way. That's when things took a turn. One of the smugglers demanded a little extra payment and began tearing at his daughter Sophia's clothes. I asked Miguel where their car was, and he told me it was parked just off a dirt road nearby. I gave him a nod and said, "Let's get you out of here." After searching the bodies, I found about $5,000 between the 3 men, $3,000 on the guy with the knife and the rest split between the other 2. I handed the money to Miguel and told him to take it. He looked at me with wide eyes, as if unsure of what to do. "Consider it payback," I said. "Now, get your family in the car, and follow me. I'll make sure you get to Las Cruces safely." It wasn't far, a 5-hour drive at most. Once I got them to their destination, I waved goodbye and headed back home, my original plan to spend a few days hunting thoroughly ruined. The sun was just starting to rise as I hit the highway, and I made good time, cutting the trip short and getting back home to Phoenix 3 days early. When I pulled into my driveway, something felt off. My driveway was packed with cars. At first, I assumed my wife, Rachel, had friends over. It wasn't unusual for her to host book club or invite people over for drinks. But as soon as I stepped inside, I realized this was no ordinary gathering. The scene inside my house was chaotic. Rachel's best friend, Laura, was on the couch with a guy I didn't recognize, and a couple of other people I vaguely remembered from her office were lounging around, clearly having had a few too many drinks. But the thing that caught my attention was the distinct lack of any card games, wine glasses, or any sign that this was the usual kind of social event Rachel would host. As I passed the guest room, I peeked inside and saw David, Rachel's brother, with one of her co-workers, both of them barely clothed. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I realized what I was about to find when I reached our bedroom. Sure enough, as I got closer, I heard voices, one male, one female. The man's voice was loud and crass, "I'm almost done. Who's next?" When I opened the door to our bedroom, I saw exactly what I had feared. Rachel, my wife of 10 years, was in bed with her boss, Richard, a man who looked about as arrogant as they come. I had my phone in my hand the entire time. Without saying a word, I hit record. The chaos that followed was almost comical. Rachel gasped and tried to cover herself with the sheet, her face turning beet red. Richard jumped out of bed, his bravado gone in an instant as he scrambled to put his clothes on. Richard, clearly still under the influence, tried to act tough, assuming some awkward martial arts stance, like he was about to take me down. I couldn't help but laugh at him. "You're going to fight me? Really?" I said, the disbelief clear in my voice. "You look ridiculous." I knew better than to start a fight in my own home. If I threw the first punch, I'd be the one getting cuffed by the cops. But if I could get him to make the first move, well, I'd have all the justification I needed to knock him out cold. I egged him on a little more. "Come on, Richard, show me what you've got. Or maybe you're all talk, just like you are in bed." That did the trick. Richard lunged at me, but before he could land a hit, I threw my phone at his face. Instinctively, he raised his hands to block it, and in that split second, I took my shot, delivering a solid punch to his gut. He doubled over, gasping for air, while I calmly picked up my phone, grabbed him by the arm, and marched him through the house. Without much effort, I shoved him out the front door, stark naked. I flicked on the porch light and slammed the door behind him, leaving him standing there in the early morning air for all the neighbors to see. While I had been busy with Richard, most of the other partygoers had dressed and left, except for 3, David, Rachel's brother, who had apparently stuck around to make sure I didn't hurt his sister, Laura, Rachel's best friend, who stood awkwardly by the hallway, biting her lip in worry, and, of course, Rachel herself. Laura was the first to speak up, her voice full of concern. "What are you going to do, Bob?" I didn't hesitate. "I'm going to divorce her." Rachel's eyes widened, tears already welling up. "Why?" "It was just sex, Bob. It didn't mean anything." I shook my head, trying to control the anger rising within me. "You took the same vows I did. I've been tempted too, but I never acted on it. I've loved you, Rachel, and I never crossed that line. You broke those vows. You've been doing this behind my back for who knows how long." Rachel sobbed, trying to defend herself, but I wasn't interested in excuses. I walked past her to the bedroom, where she had thrown on a robe, and began gathering my things. "You need to pack your stuff and leave," I told her. "This is my house too," she cried. "Not anymore," I said calmly. "Remember the prenuptial agreement your father insisted I sign?" Rachel's family came from old money. Her father had been adamant about a prenup to protect their family's wealth, ensuring that if we divorced, I would leave with nothing except what I brought into the marriage. But he hadn't expected the clause I had agreed to, one about marital infidelity. If either of us cheated, the cheater would walk away with nothing. At the time, I hadn't cared. I loved Rachel and thought I would never need to worry about such a thing. But now, as I watched her break down in front of me, I was thankful for the foresight. "You're not entitled to anything, Rachel. Not the house, not the cars, not a penny of our joint savings," I said, my voice steady but cold. "Pack your clothes and go. I'll be filing the divorce papers first thing in the morning." Rachel broke down, sobbing uncontrollably as she realized the gravity of the situation. David and Laura stood frozen, unsure of what to say or do. By the next morning, Rachel was gone, along with Richard, no doubt, and I went straight to the bank. I closed all our joint accounts and opened new ones in my name alone. Afterward, I met with a lawyer to begin the divorce proceedings. The lawyer confirmed what I already knew. We lived in a no-fault divorce state, but because of the prenup and Rachel's actions, she wouldn't be entitled to anything. I was lucky. As we discussed the details, I brought up one more point. Her boss, Richard. He owns the company she works for. Is there any way that could play into this? The lawyer raised an eyebrow. Do they have a corporate policies manual? Something about relationships between supervisors and employees? I'm pretty sure they do. I have a copy of it at home, I said. Bring it to me tomorrow. If there's a section that prohibits relationships between supervisors and their employees, we may have something to use. That evening, I went home and found the manual. Sure enough, there was a section about interoffice relationships, specifically barring anything between supervisors and subordinates. I brought it to my lawyer the next morning. We've got him, my lawyer said with a satisfied grin. The divorce papers were served to Rachel and Richard at their office, right in front of all their coworkers. 2 days later, we got a response from their side. That evening, when I got home from work, Rachel's father, James, was waiting for me on the porch. After polite greetings, he got straight to the point. Bob, I need to know what this nonsense is about you divorcing Rachel and kicking her out of the house. It's her home too. I stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath before answering. I caught her cheating, James. I threw her out, and now I'm divorcing her. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. This is all because of that ridiculous prenup, isn't it? You're actually using that against her? I nodded. Yes, the agreement you insisted I sign. You remember the clause, right? The one that said if either of us cheats, the cheater walks away with nothing but the clothes on their back. You made me sign it. This is the consequence. James sighed, clearly frustrated. She's only human, Bob. She made a mistake, people do that. She loves you, and I'm sure you can get past this. I'm not so sure, I replied. From what I've learned, this affair has been going on for over a year, and there were other men too. This wasn't a one-time mistake. His tone shifted, becoming more serious. Look, the prenup was meant to protect the family business. It wasn't supposed to be used like this. Then you should have written it that way, I said calmly. The way it's worded, it's clear. She cheated. She walks away with nothing. James's face hardened. You need to go easy on her, son. If you force me to hire a lawyer for Rachel, things could get ugly. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and pressed a few buttons. If you want trouble, James, I'll give you trouble, I said, holding up the phone for him to see. His eyes widened as he recognized what was playing on the screen. Wait, that's David, he stammered in disbelief. Yes, it's him, I said. And then you'll hear what comes next. On the recording, you could clearly hear David's voice from our bedroom, saying, I'm almost done. Who's next, followed by the image of Rachel and Richard scrambling out of bed. I paused the video and looked James dead in the eye. How unpleasant would it be for all your friends and business associates to get a copy of this? You wouldn't dare, James growled. Oh, I would, I replied coolly. But I'll make you a deal. If you stay out of this and let the divorce proceed, I'll destroy the video. No one else will ever see it. But if you get involved and hire a lawyer for Rachel, I'll go nuclear. The choice is yours. For a moment, it seemed like James might try to argue, but then something changed. His expression turned deadly serious, and to my surprise, he pulled a .38 revolver from his coat pocket, aiming it directly at me. Give me the phone, he demanded, his voice cold. I kept my cool. For what? You're going to delete the video? Exactly, he said. Hand it over. I handed him the phone without a word. He waved the gun in my face and ordered me to step back to the other side of the room. As I backed away, I watched him fumble with the phone, his hands shaking slightly as he pressed buttons to delete the video. Once he was done, he placed the phone on the table and gave me a hard look. "See you in court," he said before walking out the door. As soon as he was gone, I went to my computer and sent the video to Rachel's mother. Within half an hour, I got a call from James, his voice dripping with fury. "You dirty son of a gun. How could you stoop so low as to send that filth to my wife?" "I warned you, James," I said. "You didn't take me seriously. If you mess with me again, I'll send it to everyone. I can't believe you thought I wouldn't have backup copies." There was a long pause on the other end before he growled, "You idiot," and hung up. He didn't hire a lawyer for Rachel, and the divorce went through without further complications. I was surprised when, 2 days after the divorce was finalized, Laura called me. "Did you really mean it when you said you had feelings for me?" she asked, her voice soft and a little hesitant. "I did," I replied, not quite sure where this conversation was going. "I'm free tonight," she said. "If you still feel that way." I hadn't been with anyone since I'd filed for divorce, out of respect for what I thought marriage meant, even if my wife had cheated on me. But now, with the divorce final, I felt like I could move on. And Laura, who had always been supportive, was the person I needed. "How about dinner, drinks, and some conversation?" she suggested. "We'll see where it goes from there." "Sounds good. I'll pick you up at 6. That evening, after a nice dinner and a few drinks, I asked her something that had been on my mind. "Why now? Why call me right after the divorce?" She smiled knowingly, swirling her drink in her hand. "I know the kind of man you are, Bob. You would never have gotten involved with someone else while you were still married, no matter what Rachel did. Am I wrong?" I nodded slowly. "You're right about that." "And told me about the divorce," she continued. "I figured you were free now, and I've always had a thing for you. I thought, why not give it a shot?" There was something so refreshingly honest about Laura. No games, no pretense, just the truth. I liked that about her. We went back to my place, and that night, we shared more than just conversation. It was comfortable and familiar, the kind of connection that didn't need a lot of explaining. The next morning, over breakfast, Laura leaned back in her chair and smiled at me. "You know, I'm not looking for a serious relationship. I've been through enough to know that long-term commitments aren't for me. But if you're interested in something casual, something fun, I'd love to keep spending time together." I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but at that moment, I didn't mind the idea of keeping things light and easy. "I can live with that," I told her. "Let's just take it one day at a time." For the next few months, Laura and I had a casual but fulfilling relationship. We didn't put any labels on it, and there was no pressure to make things more than what they were. We spent our weekends together, went out for dinner, shared drinks, and sometimes stayed in bed all day. It was the perfect distraction from everything I'd been through. About 3 months into my casual relationship with Laura, I got a call from my lawyer. "Bob, I've got some good news for you. Your lawsuits have been settled. After deducting my fees, you're left with $1.3 million. I was stunned. The settlement was more than I expected, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. With that kind of money, I could finally start thinking about my future without constantly worrying about finances. A month later, things between Laura and me started to cool off. We'd had a good run, but it was clear that our relationship had run its course. One evening, she sat me down after dinner and said, "Bob, I think it's time we call it quits." I wasn't surprised. "Yeah, I've been feeling that too. I hope we can still be friends," she said, smiling softly. "Of course," I replied. "No hard feelings." After that, Laura and I parted ways, and I spent the next 6 months casually dating a few different women, none of whom made a lasting impression. I was content with the single life, enjoying my freedom and having fun, but part of me was still looking for something more meaningful. One Tuesday evening, I found myself at the Silver Spur, a local bar, for dinner. As I sat down at the bar and glanced over the menu, the waitress approached to take my order. House margarita, 3 cheese and onion enchiladas, rice, and beans, I said. The waitress gave me a knowing smile and said, "Very well, senor. Perhaps you could make sure I get home safely when I finish work tonight." I raised an eyebrow in confusion. "What?" She leaned in slightly and whispered, "Didn't you appoint yourself as my protector that night near the El Paso border?" I stared at her for a moment, and then it clicked. "That was you?" She nodded, her smile widening. "It was hard to tell back then. You were all bundled up, and your face was mostly covered. I never got a good look at you." "I thought you'd be in Las Cruces by now," I said, surprised. "I couldn't find work there," she explained. "Too many people like me, and not enough jobs. My cousin suggested I try Denver, and I've been here ever since." I glanced at the clock. "When do you finish?" "In about an hour," she said with a wink before walking off to place my order. As I watched her walk away, I couldn't help but notice how much she had changed since that night. She had a confidence now that she hadn't had before. Her name was Isabel, and as I thought about it, I decided that maybe we should definitely talk later. After finishing my dinner, I waited at the bar for Isabel to finish her shift. She came over with a bright smile, and we walked out together into the crisp evening air. "Thanks for waiting," she said as we stepped outside. "No problem," I replied. "I have to admit, I wasn't expecting to run into you again." "Neither was I," she laughed. "It's funny how life works, huh?" As we walked to her car, I asked, "How have things been since that night at the border?" She shrugged, her smile faltering slightly. "It's been tough, you know. I've been doing my best to get by. Working here helps, but it's not exactly easy to build a life from scratch in a new place." "I can imagine," I said sympathetically. "Are you here on your own?" "Yeah, my cousin helped me get settled, but it's been just me for a while now," Isabel explained. "Sometimes I still feel like I'm being watched, though. It's probably nothing, but after everything that happened, it's hard to shake the feeling." I frowned, concerned. "If you ever feel unsafe, you can call me. I'll help however I can." She gave me a grateful look. "Thanks, Bob. That means a lot." We reached her car, and she hesitated for a moment before inviting me inside for coffee. I accepted, and we spent the next couple of hours talking about everything, about how she'd made her way to Denver, her struggles to find work, and her hopes for the future. As the conversation deepened, there was a comfortable silence that fell between us. Then, out of nowhere, she leaned in and kissed me softly, catching me by surprise. I kissed her back, and before long, we found ourselves wrapped up in each other, the chemistry undeniable. We ended up spending the night together. The next morning, over breakfast, Isabel looked at me with a soft smile. "What happens now?" I thought about it for a moment, unsure of how to answer. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I do like you, Isabel. Let's see where this goes." She smiled back. "I'd like that." Over the next few weeks, we saw each other regularly. I helped her where I could, fixing things in her apartment, driving her to work when she needed a ride. As we spent more time together, our connection grew stronger, and I realized I was starting to develop real feelings for her. One evening, after a long day, we sat together on her couch, watching TV. She turned to me, her expression more serious than usual. "Bob, I need to tell you something." I looked at her, sensing the weight of her words. "What is it?" "I've never felt this way about anyone before," she confessed. "You've done so much for me, and I don't want to lose you." "You're not going to lose me," I reassured her, placing a hand on hers. "I care about you too." As time went on, Isabel and I grew closer. She was different from anyone I had ever known, down to earth, genuine, and full of gratitude for the little things. There was no sense of entitlement, no hidden motives. She appreciated every gesture, every moment we spent together, and I found myself falling for her more with each passing day. One evening, as we were sitting on the couch, she turned to me with a serious look in her eyes. "Bob, I think I'm falling in love with you." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been through so much, and I wasn't sure I was ready for this. My mind flashed back to the betrayal I'd experienced with Rachel, the years of deceit, and the trust that had been shattered. But when I looked into Isabel's eyes, I knew she wasn't Rachel. She wasn't like anyone I had ever been with before. She was honest, kind, and pure-hearted. "I think I'm falling for you too," I admitted softly. For the first time in a long while, I felt hope that maybe this time things would be different. Maybe this was the kind of love I had been searching for all along. But as life has a way of doing, things took a turn I hadn't expected. A few weeks later, I started to notice small changes in Isabel. She became more distant, more distracted. At first, I thought it was just stress from work, but then the late-night phone calls started. When I asked her about them, she brushed it off, saying it was just a friend from back home. I wanted to believe her, but my gut told me something was off. One night, I came home from work earlier than usual and found Isabel's phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. I hadn't intended to snoop, but when I glanced at the screen, I saw a message from someone named Jake. "Can't wait to see you again tonight." My heart sank. I picked up the phone and scrolled through the messages. They were flirtatious, and it was clear that something was going on behind my back. When Isabel walked in a few minutes later, I confronted her. "Who's Jake?" I asked, holding up her phone. Her face went pale, and she stammered, "It's not what you think, Bob." "I swear." "It's exactly what I think," I said quietly, trying to control my anger. "You've been cheating on me, haven't you?" Isabel broke down in tears, admitting that she had been seeing Jake for a few weeks. She claimed it didn't mean anything, that it was a mistake, but I couldn't listen to any more of her excuses. "Pack your things and get out," I said, my voice cold. "Bob, please," she sobbed. "I'm sorry. I'll end it. Just give me another chance." "I gave you my trust, and you broke it," I replied, trying to remain calm. "There's no coming back from that. I'm done." She packed her belongings that night and left, and as the door closed behind her, I sat down on the couch, feeling the all-too-familiar sting of betrayal once again. The days after Isabel left were tough. I had allowed myself to trust again, to hope for something real, and once again, that trust had been shattered. It was hard not to feel bitter. After Rachel and now Isabel, I wondered if I was ever going to find someone who wouldn't betray me. I threw myself into work, avoiding the empty house as much as possible. On the weekends, I would hang out with friends, try to distract myself with hobbies, but no matter what I did, the feeling of disappointment and anger lingered. One afternoon, about a month after Isabel left, she called me out of the blue. I debated whether or not to answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hey, Bob," she said, her voice quiet. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I just wanted to apologize." I stayed silent, letting her continue. "I messed up, and I know that. I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I realize how much I hurt you. You didn't deserve that, and I just needed to tell you that I'm sorry." Her words were genuine, and as much as I wanted to stay angry, part of me appreciated the apology. But an apology couldn't fix what had been broken. "I appreciate the call, Isabel," I said, my voice steady but distant. "But it doesn't change anything. What's done is done." There was a long pause on the other end before she finally said, "I understand." "I'm sorry, Bob." "Take care of yourself," I said before hanging up, feeling a strange sense of closure. After that, I felt a weight lift. Isabel's apology hadn't changed the past, but it allowed me to let go of some of the anger I had been holding on to. It was time to move on. With that chapter closed, I focused on myself. I went back to doing the things I enjoyed, hiking, spending time with friends, and just living my life without the complications of a relationship. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace with being alone. Then, one night, as I was out with friends at a local bar, I ran into someone from my past, Ashley, a woman I had dated briefly before I married Rachel. We hadn't ended things on bad terms, but life had taken us in different directions. "Ashley?" I said, surprised when I saw her at the bar. She turned, and her face lit up with recognition. "Bob. Wow, it's been ages. How have you been?" We spent the next hour catching up, talking about old times and where life had taken us since we'd last seen each other. She told me about her career, her ups and downs, and I found myself smiling as we reminisced about the past. By the end of the night, we exchanged numbers and promised to stay in touch. A few days later, I asked her out for coffee, and before I knew it, we were meeting regularly. There was something easy about being with Ashley. No pressure, no expectations, just two people reconnecting. For the first time in a long time, I found myself genuinely enjoying someone's company without the fear of betrayal lurking in the back of my mind. As the weeks went by, my connection with Ashley deepened. It wasn't rushed, and there were no complicated expectations. We were simply enjoying each other's company, reconnecting after all those years apart. It felt natural, like we were picking up where we had left off but with the wisdom and experiences we'd gained along the way. One evening, we were sitting on the porch of my house, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow over the neighborhood. It was one of those moments that felt peaceful, almost surreal in its simplicity. Ashley turned to me and asked a question I hadn't expected. "Bob, what really happened between you and Rachel?" she asked gently. "I know we haven't talked much about it, and I don't want to bring up bad memories, but I've always wondered." I hesitated for a moment. I had avoided talking about Rachel for a reason, it wasn't something I liked revisiting. But if anyone deserved the truth, it was Ashley. "Rachel cheated on me," I said quietly, my voice steady. "For a long time. I caught her in the act, and that was the end of it. We got divorced." Ashley didn't say anything at first, just reached over and placed her hand on mine. "I'm so sorry, Bob. That must have been so hard." "It was," I admitted. "But it's in the past now. I've moved on." We sat in comfortable silence for a few moments before she asked, "Do you think you'll ever get married again?" I hadn't thought about it seriously since the divorce. "I don't know," I said honestly. I used to think I'd never want to get married again, after everything that happened. But now, with the right person, maybe. Ashley smiled softly, and in that moment, I realized that I could see a future with her. I didn't know where things would go, but I wasn't afraid of the possibility anymore. Our relationship continued to grow, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was building something meaningful again. We didn't rush things, but we both knew we were in it for the long haul. It was a new beginning, and I was finally ready to embrace it.